The courtroom was filled with an eerie silence, thick with anticipation. Judge Thomas Wexler sat at the high bench, his gaze unreadable as he flipped through the final pages of the case file. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the gavel hung in the air, ready to bring down a decision that would forever alter the lives of those involved. It wasn't just another custody battle. It had captivated the town for months. News outlets buzzed with speculation, and everyone in the community had an opinion. But no one, not even the seasoned attorneys in the room, could have predicted what was about to unfold. On one side sat Danielle Carter, her back stiff, her hands tightly gripping the table. She was no longer the loving mother she once appeared to be. The courtroom drama had painted her as reckless and manipulative. Her once gentle demeanor now felt like a facade, with every word her ex-husband's lawyer uttered painting her as unfit to care for her own child. Her eyes flickered nervously at her son, who sat silently between the attorneys, his small body tense. He barely glanced at her, his fingers clinging to the edge of his seat, a stark contrast to the bright and playful child he once was. Across from her, Gregory Miles sat poised, his face a mask of calm. He had spent the last 6 months fighting for full custody, presenting himself as the responsible, stable father who would do anything to protect his child. His attorney had painted the perfect image of him, father of the year, never missing a chance to care for his son. But as he adjusted his cuffs and shifted in his seat, there was a faint tightness around his jaw, a subtle tension in his posture. It was almost as if he were preparing for a battle, not just in the courtroom, but within himself. The battle to maintain control was slipping, and the weight of his actions was starting to show. Judge Wexler took a deep breath as he surveyed the room, his gaze moving from the defendant to the plaintiff. "I have reviewed the testimonies and evidence presented," he said slowly, his voice commanding yet calm, "and I am now ready to deliver my ruling." The air in the room thickened. The final moment had arrived. Danielle's breath caught in her chest as she braced herself for the inevitable blow. Gregory leaned forward, his fingers curling ever so slightly into a fist on the table. His lawyer sat frozen, eyes wide, waiting for the judge's decision. And then, just as the gavel was about to come down, a voice cut through the tension. "Wait!" The boy's voice rang out. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, eyes turning toward the back of the room. A young boy, no older than 10, stood up, his fists clenched at his sides, his face flushed with emotion. His small body trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the truth he was about to speak. "That's not what happened," the boy said, his voice soft, but with an edge of urgency that silenced the room. All eyes were on him now. Danielle's face drained of color, and Gregory's hand froze in midair, his fingers now a fist. Even Judge Wexler, known for his calm and collected demeanor, paused for a moment, unsure of what to make of the unexpected interruption. The boy stepped forward cautiously, his sneakers scraping softly against the polished floor. His small frame was almost lost in the sea of towering adults, but his presence felt monumental. He didn't hesitate, though. His voice was steady as he faced the judge, and the room held its breath. "Step forward, son," Judge Wexler commanded, his tone firm, yet laced with curiosity. The boy swallowed hard, but he did as instructed, stepping toward the front of the room, eyes darting briefly between his parents. His hands clenched at his sides, his face set with determination. It was clear that whatever he had to say, he had been carrying it for a long time. "What's your name, son?" the judge asked, his sharp eyes watching the boy closely. "Liam," the boy said simply, his voice strong despite his small size. The room stirred as they processed the revelation that this was Gregory Miles' son. Danielle's breath hitched, her heart hammering in her chest. She hadn't expected this. The boy, her son's brother, was about to speak his truth. Liam's eyes flickered briefly toward his mother, who looked pale and silent, then to his father, whose face had gone stone cold. He looked back at the judge, a quiet defiance in his eyes. "You said that's not what happened. What did you mean, Liam?" Judge Wexler asked, leaning forward slightly, his gaze intense. Liam hesitated for only a moment. His gaze shifted between his parents, each one looking like a stranger to him. But he didn't falter. The words that spilled out of his mouth were heavy with truth. "They lied," Liam said, his voice unshaken, despite the storm of emotions churning inside him. The words hung in the air like a grenade, leaving everyone stunned. The courtroom erupted into hushed murmurs as the shock settled over everyone. Danielle's face twisted with disbelief, and Gregory's hand gripped the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "They both lied," Liam added, his voice growing stronger, more sure of itself with each word. A shockwave rippled through the room. How could a 10-year-old boy expose the lies of two grown adults so effortlessly? Even the most seasoned attorneys in the room were speechless. "Liam," Judge Wexler said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority, "what did they lie about?" Liam looked down at his hands, his small fingers twitching. Then, with a deep breath, he spoke the words that would change everything. "The fights. The stories they told about each other," Liam said, his voice cracking. "They're not true." The room was so still that the ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound. Everyone was waiting for the next bombshell. Danielle looked at her son, her face a mixture of fear and disbelief. Gregory's jaw tightened, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "They both wanted to win so bad," Liam continued, his voice stronger now. "They made stuff up, but they forgot about me." The words seemed to reverberate in the room, settling like an uncomfortable weight on everyone. Danielle's breath hitched in her chest as tears welled up in her eyes. Gregory shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face growing darker with every word Liam spoke. "No one asked me what I wanted," Liam's voice broke as he finally let the truth spill out. "Nobody asked me what really happened." The room was deathly silent now, every person in the room suspended in the gravity of Liam's words. The attorneys glanced at each other, unsure of how to proceed, but Liam wasn't done. His small voice cracked once more as he spoke. "They just wanted to win." The tension in the courtroom was palpable. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped completely. Everyone in the room, attorneys, the judge, even the onlookers, was caught in the gravitational pull of the young boy's words. Liam stood there, his shoulders trembling, eyes brimming with emotion. Yet there was an undeniable strength in him, a quiet power that seemed to transcend his age. Judge Wexler's gaze softened, and for the first time since entering the room, he allowed himself to show the faintest sign of vulnerability. His stern face, usually so impassive, reflected the depth of the boy's plea. "Liam," the judge said, his voice low but steady, "tell us more. What do you mean by saying they forgot about you?" Liam swallowed hard, his small chest rising and falling with each shaky breath. He didn't look at his parents anymore. His eyes were focused solely on the judge, as if all his thoughts and fears were now aimed at this one person. "They didn't care about what I needed," he said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet sadness that made it impossible for anyone in the room to dismiss him. "They both just wanted to be right. They didn't ask me what I wanted. They only cared about winning." There was a flicker of guilt on Gregory's face, but it was fleeting. He quickly masked it with a stoic expression. Danielle, on the other hand, had started to cry silently, her tears trailing down her cheeks as she looked at her son, her heart breaking. The weight of her own choices, her own actions, seemed to crash down on her in that instant. She had been so focused on protecting her own position, on fighting against Gregory, that she had never truly considered what her son needed. As the silence lingered, Liam continued, his voice a little stronger now, emboldened by his own truth. "I didn't want to be a pawn in their fight. I didn't want to feel like I had to choose between them. They made me feel like I wasn't important, like what I felt didn't matter." The room was silent again, each person processing the gravity of his words. The attorneys exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing how deeply the case had affected the child at the center of it all. The court had become a battleground for two parents, each determined to claim victory, but in the process, they had neglected the most important aspect, their child's well-being. The judge took a deep breath, his brow furrowing as he looked at the boy. "Liam, I want to thank you for your courage. Not many people, let alone children, can express their feelings so clearly. I'm sure this wasn't easy for you." Liam nodded, though his eyes were still filled with unshed tears. He wasn't looking for sympathy, but for understanding. He wanted his truth to be heard, even if it meant shaking the very foundations of the battle being fought around him. Danielle's sobs had quieted, but her eyes were still locked on her son. In her heart, she knew that this moment was not just about the courtroom. It was about a broken relationship, a shattered trust, and the emotional toll of years of turmoil. She had been so caught up in trying to win, in trying to be right, that she had failed to see the toll it was taking on the one person who mattered the most, her son. Gregory, on the other hand, shifted in his seat, his face betraying no emotion. He had always prided himself on being the responsible one, the stable one. But in that moment, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his own guilt. His actions, his relentless pursuit of victory, had come at a cost, one that was far higher than he had ever anticipated. Judge Wexler took a moment to compose himself before speaking again. "This case was never just about custody," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This was about two parents fighting to hold on to something they've both lost sight of, and that something, above all else, is the well-being of their son." The judge's words hung in the air, each syllable cutting through the tension in the room. It was as if the weight of the world had shifted, and in that moment, everything changed. The courtroom no longer felt like a battleground, but rather a place where truth was finally allowed to breathe, even if it was uncomfortable, even if it meant exposing the raw, painful realities of the situation. "Liam," Judge Wexler continued, "you've made your voice heard today, and that voice will not be ignored. The decisions made in this courtroom will be shaped by the truth you've shared with us. We are all responsible for the future of this child, and the future must be one where his needs come first." Gregory and Danielle both sat in stunned silence, unable to speak. Their eyes were locked on their son, but it was as if they were seeing him for the first time. In the chaos of their legal battle, they had failed to see the human cost of their decisions. And now, it was too late to turn back. The judge paused, letting his words sink in. Then, he turned his gaze to the attorneys. "I will review the situation in light of this new testimony," he said, his voice resolute. "And I will make a decision based not only on the legal aspects, but also on what is best for Liam's future." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the gavel came down, not with finality, but with purpose. The room was still, but the weight of the moment was undeniable. This was not just about a legal ruling. It was about a child reclaiming his voice in a world that had tried to silence him. A world where, despite the battles between adults, the child's needs would finally be heard. As the courtroom began to empty, the aftermath of what had just transpired settled heavily on the shoulders of the parents. Their battle was not over, but they had just been forced to confront the truth they had been avoiding for so long. Gregory stood, his movements stiff and mechanical. He looked at Danielle, his eyes cold and distant. He didn't say anything, but the silence between them spoke volumes. There was no triumph in his expression, no victory in his heart, only the haunting realization that, perhaps, he had lost the one thing that truly mattered. Danielle, meanwhile, had tears in her eyes, but they were no longer just tears of sadness. They were tears of regret, of understanding. For the first time, she could see the full picture. The picture of a child caught in the middle of a war he never asked for. A child who had to grow up too fast because the adults around him couldn't see beyond their own egos. Liam, still standing in the middle of the courtroom, looked at both of them with a quiet sorrow. But there was something else in his eyes, a glimmer of hope. For the first time, his voice had been heard. For the first time, he had felt seen. And for Liam, that was all that mattered.